Random thoughts. In this video, I'm going to discuss or bring up an issue that Sir Charles Elliot, or a statement that he makes in his book, The East Africa Protectorate, which was published in 1905. And it's about how docile the Africans became very quickly and how that surprised the Europeans. Now, Sir Charles Elliot was what was known as the Commissioner of British East Africa. This was like the highest office on the land, and this is the office that later on was turned to be, I think, the Governor General, and of course we can say is the office that became what we know today as the President of the Republic of Kenya when Kenya became independent. Of course, it became office of the Governor General when Kenya became a colony in the 1920s. Now we are talking of the early 1900s, and Kenya at that point was just a protectorate. And Sir Charles Elliot held that office, or was in that office, from 1902 to 1904 when he resigned for some reasons. And then, of course, he wrote this book. This is a very detailed, comprehensive book, and it discusses many things. It discusses the history of the land, talks about the geography, talks about the people, it talks about the potential economic and in terms of agriculture, and many other things that maybe thought would interest any British or European who was thinking about moving to the country, including, in fact, health and how safe it was for them when it came to diseases and things like that. Now, of course, in the book, there is a lot of talk about agriculture. And of course, when you think about agriculture, especially during that time, not now, of course, agriculture has been mechanized so much that today you might need, or you need very little of human labor to carry out agriculture on a large piece of land. You can do it with machines. But during that time, in early 1900s, late 19th century, early 20th century, you needed manpower, you needed people to use their hands to work on the land. That was very, very important. And in the book, he discusses the availability of labor. And in several parts of the book, of course, he makes statements that are kind of disturbing. For example, he says that when they move the Kikuyu from their land, those people can become very useful as, of course, source of labor. And we know that the British took many steps to make sure that the Africans will provide the labor. For example, they introduced the taxes, so that the only way you'll get money to pay taxes was to go and work for a British farmer, for example. They pay you so that you do the taxes. Without the taxes, many Africans did not have a reason to why they needed to go and be hired by anyone. They will just keep the animals, do their subsistence farming or small farming, so do some trade, and they were good. But now with the introduction of taxes, of course, they needed to go and work. Now, the Sir Charles Elliot, of course, as I've said, brings up this topic a few times, and there is this part where he talks about, he's trying to assure the British who are thinking moving to the land or moving to East Africa, especially to do farming, and he was trying to tell them what they needed to do. In fact, he talks about how much money they needed to buy land and how they will get land, and what about the situation with labor, how available is it, or how cheap can they find the labor, or how expensive it is. Of course, giving them advice or trying to give them knowledge that they could use. Then he says that the labor is available, and he brings up the issue of different groups of people and how they can be useful, the Maasai, the Kikuyu, how they can be useful in doing different types of jobs. And then he says that now that's where he talks about the docility, he calls it the docility of the people, how the Africans had become docile. And he says it was surprising to them. And I was surprised by that statement, that actually initially they did not see Africans becoming docile or docile enough to work for them. And then it happened and they kind of like got surprised. But then, of course, they played along because it was beneficial to them. And of course, they continue using them for quite a while, of course. And I found that to be quite interesting. And I'm going to read that part. He says, "Our experience of native labor since we have occupied the protectorate is encouraging, for the native have of late shown a docility and aptitude which was hardly anticipated, and have proved that they can and will work not only in the fields but at various mechanical crafts in the railway workshops." So the Africans becoming docile and accepting to be under race, it seems like it came as a surprise to the Europeans, which is surprising, actually. That means that they expected more resistance than what they got. That's what this tells me, that they expected the Africans to be a little bit difficult. But then so quickly the Africans were persuaded, and I think it was persuasion through PR, propaganda, and things like that. And of course, other things like taxes and force, of course. They were And of course, making Africans sabotage themselves through or betray one another and things like that. Eventually, the Africans became docile. So docile that they became useful as a source of labor. Those are my random thoughts.